Hey everyone, so we are on the other side of another election day, and I want you to know that I'm recording this before the winner has been announced, and I'm doing this intentionally because what I want to talk about today, I didn't want anyone to think that the outcome was clouding what I'm saying or how I'm feeling in this moment as we need to try to interpret perhaps what's going on in our world today. That said, I think that eventually we know that soon, at maybe not soon, who knows, but eventually they're going to declare a victor and they're going to have someone declare that they've been defeated. But I know that the controversy, or I anticipate at least that the controversy is going to continue on. You see, the truth is victory is tricky. It's a tricky thing to understand what victory is all about. I was actually going to call this devotional Victory, but I was afraid if I did that, that even might be interpreted wrongly. So I came up with a different title for this particular devotional. The thing is, once victory is declared, once we have a victor as to who is going to take over the White House, half of the country is going to feel as if their prayers have been answered, and the other half is going to feel the exact opposite. Half of the country is probably going to feel that God is with them, and the other half is probably going to feel abandoned. Half of them will feel like God has placed their choice in the White House, and the other are probably going to feel like God has somehow turned their backs on them. You see, the truth is, if you really look at the scripture, God allowed the nation of Israel to have both good kings and not so good kings, good leaders and poor leaders, good authorities and corrupt authorities. That's kind of the way life is sometimes. There are good and there are not so good, and our definition of what is good and what is not so good is kind of sometimes a personal definition. But you know what? Here's the thing. In the midst of when there was a good king, as announced in Scripture, or when there was an announcement in Scripture of a corrupt or bad king, what remained the same was that God was God, and God was in control. And the whys for why things are happening the way they are remained among the people as well as the prophets. So here's the thing. No matter who is declared the winner of these races, and in particular the race for the White House, no matter who is declared as the winner, we've got a lot of work to do. It doesn't matter who wins or who loses. We've still got a lot of work to do because we are broken and we are divided, and somehow we all need to figure out how to get on the same or at least a similar page for what we see needing to happen to move forward. And the problem is, I think sometimes we can really become distracted by our own desires and our own hopes rather than recognizing the hope and the desire of God. You know, as Jesus moved closer to the cross, his words for what was important and the desire that he had for his disciples really became more and more intense. Much of what he said at the end of each of the Gospels seemed to be trying to keep his disciples focused because of what was going on around them and what was going to go on around them and the hope that was going to happen after all that was going to take place. So it wasn't really on the victories and the powers of the world that Jesus was focused on. It was really about the victory that he was about to have over death and the power of God in the midst of all the good and all the struggles that happen with life. There's this moment in the Gospels. It's actually talked about in all three of the four Gospels. I really like the way Mark records what was happening in this. But again, this happens in all of the Gospels, and it's right towards the end of Jesus' public ministry. In Mark, it is in Mark chapter 13, the first two verses. This is what happens. It says, as Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, What large stones and what large buildings. Do you see these great buildings? Said Jesus. Not one stone will be here upon another. All will be thrown down. You know, it's so interesting. The disciples were so impressed at what had been accomplished. This beautiful temple. You see, the fact is, the original temple that was built by Solomon had been destroyed during the time right before the exile. And after the exile, the people came and they began to rebuild that temple, that dwelling place of God, because that's truly what the temple was supposed to be. It was supposed to be the home for God on earth. It was a place where they could go and worship and sacrifice. It was a symbol of God's presence and God's power. And it was also a symbol, this second temple that was built was a symbol of the victory that they had over the exile that they had been brought into. But here's the thing that maybe some of you don't know. That second temple that was built, sure, it was begun by the people, but it was actually Herod the Great, the one who ruled over them in Judah, the civil authority of Judah, the one that was known at that time as the King of the Jews. It was Herod the Great that actually completed and expanded and beautified the temple. People even referred to that second temple as Herod's temple, Herod's great accomplishment. And so I was thinking about this week. You know, that temple, that symbol of the temple, was both the symbol of the great power of the faith, of religion, but it was also a symbol of the great work of the civil authorities. It was this wonderful symbol of faith and state coming together. And that's why it was really curious to me that when the disciples were leaving the temple and that one disciple said, "Teacher, look at how beautiful and how wonderful this place is." Jesus responded, "You know what? Not one stone will be left standing." It's curious. The greatest accomplishments for humans in terms of faith and the greatest accomplishment for humans in terms of their civil authorities, it's all going to fall away. None of that is going to last. You see, when Jesus talked about the temple, he talked about himself as the temple, the true dwelling place for God. The true place of power and the true place of victory for God was in Jesus himself. And that's why being distracted by the powers that we see and associate now, that's why being distracted by those powers and not recognizing the power of God that is behind all that is and all that ever will be is so dangerous for us. So yes, in a day or so, maybe a week, there is going to be declared a victor. And that victor will be the president for 4 years. But in reality, for you and me, the Lord of life is not going to be just 4 years. The Lord of life is going to be forever. And that's why I say no matter who wins, we've got a lot of work to do. We've got to figure out how to put the words of the Lord of life into action. We've got to figure out how to live the love and grace that God has encouraged us to, no matter who sits in the White House or who is got control over Congress or who sits in the Supreme Court. Because eventually those things will most likely pass away. But the word of the Lord and the power of the Lord and the love of God through Jesus Christ, that's what lasts forever. So hang in there. Hang in there. Whether you win or whether you lose, it is not about that victory. It is about the victory that Christ gave for us on the cross. God is still king. God is still, no matter who wins this election, in charge and the Lord of you and me. Thank you for listening.